Hi, Adams. This is Miss Kovarik. We are on lesson 15 of our American Revolution unit, and we're going to read a story today called Rip Van Winkle. So here's your vocab. Provoke is a verb, and that means to cause something to happen or to bring out anger in a person or people. Console is a verb, to comfort or try to make someone feel better. Peal is a noun, a loud noise or repeated noises. 9 pins is a noun, a bowling game played with 9 pins. Breeches are noun, pants that cover the hips just down below the knee. Melancholy is an adjective, and that means sad or depressed. Skeptical is an adjective, which means doubtful. Revere is a verb, to respect or honor. And then henpecked is an adjective, and that is used to describe a man who is controlled or criticized by his wife. So again, this story is called Rip Van Winkle, and it's adapted from a story by Washington Irving. And he is also the author of the story we read last lesson, which was The Headless Hessian. So your big question today when we're reading this, think about how does Washington Irving weave fact and fiction together in the telling of Rip Van Winkle. So some things in here are facts from this time period, and other things are fiction, can't happen, not a true thing. So think about what is the fact here and what is the fiction. In a village in the Catskill Mountains, there lived a simple, good-natured fellow by the name of Rip Van Winkle. He was a kind neighbor, and the children would shout with joy whenever he approached. Rip Van Winkle was a lovable soul who was ready to attend to anybody's business but his own. As to keeping his own farm in order, he found it impossible, and his children were as ragged as if they belonged to nobody. Rip was one of those happy fools who lived without a care, ate white bread or brown, whichever required less thought or trouble, and preferred to starve on a penny than work for a pound. If left to himself, he would have whistled his life away in perfect contentment, but his wife was continually complaining about his laziness and the ruin he was bringing upon his family. Rip would shrug his shoulders, shake his head, cast up his eyes, but say nothing. This always provoked a fresh attack from his wife, so he frequently left the house to go outside. Rip used to console himself when driving home with the company of a group of other men who met on a bench in front of an inn. Sitting beneath a portrait of His Majesty King George III, they talked over village gossip and told stories. If by chance an old newspaper fell into their hands, they would listen as Van Bummel, the schoolmaster, read aloud its contents. All kinds of discussions followed the reading of the newspaper. Nicholas Vedder, a respected elder member of the village, made his opinions known by the manner in which he smoked his pipe. Short puffs indicated anger. When he was pleased, he inhaled the smoke slowly and expelled it in light, delicate clouds. And this is the men outside the inn, reading the newspaper, talking, consoling each other. One day, seeking to escape the hard work of the farm and the complaints of his wife, Rip grabbed his gun and walked into the Catskill Mountains to hunt for squirrels. All day the mountains echoed with the sound of shots fired from his gun. Finally, he sat down on a little green hill that looked down into the valley below. Rip admired the scene as evening gradually advanced and sighed as he thought about the journey home. As he was about to descend, he heard a voice calling, "Rip Van Winkle! Rip Van Winkle!" He caught sight of a strange figure climbing up the rocks, carrying something on its back. Rip was surprised to see any human being in this lonely place, but he concluded that it must be one of his neighbors in need of assistance. Rip hurried down to help. The stranger was a short old fellow with a grizzled beard. His clothes were old-fashioned, and he carried a stout keg that Rip supposed was full of something refreshing to drink. He made signs for Rip to assist him, and together they clambered up a narrow gully. Every now and then, long rolling peals like thunder seemed to issue out of a deep ravine. Passing through this ravine, they came to a hollow. In the center was a company of odd-looking persons playing at 9 pins. The thunderous noise Rip had heard from afar was the sound of the ball rolling toward the pins. Like Rip's guide, they were dressed in an outlandish fashion, with enormous breeches. What seemed particularly odd to Rip was that these folks looked very serious indeed. They played without speaking and were, in fact, the most melancholy party he had ever witnessed. They stared at Rip in such a way that his heart turned within him and his knees banged together. Rip and his guide joined the party. His guide emptied the keg into large tankards and the men sipped in silence. When they were done, they returned to their game. As Rip's fear subsided, he ventured to taste the beverage too. Before long, the events of the day and the mountain air overpowered Rip, and he fell into a deep sleep. These are the men playing ninepins. You can see they're dressed differently. Upon waking, Rip found himself on the green hill where he had first seen the old man. It was a bright sunny morning. Surely, thought Rip, I have not slept here all night. He recalled the strange men. Oh, what excuse shall I make to Dom Van Winkle? He looked around for his gun, but found only an old rusty firearm. Suspecting he had been robbed, he decided to find the old-fashioned man and demand his gun. As he rose to walk, he found himself stiff in the joints. With some difficulty, he found the gully up which he and his companion had ascended, but could find no traces of the ravine that had led to the area with the odd little men playing ninepins. He shouldered the rusty firearm and with a heart full of trouble turned his steps homeward. As he approached the village, he met a number of people, but none whom he knew. This surprised him, for he thought he was acquainted with every one of his neighbors. Their dress, too, was of a different fashion. They all stared at him with surprise and stroked their chins. When Rip did the same, he found to his astonishment that his beard had grown a foot long. A troop of children ran at his heels, hooting after him and pointing at his gray beard. And that is the troop of children that's pointing at him and laughing, and there's Rip with his big, long beard. There were houses in the village that he had never seen before, with unfamiliar names over the doors. He began to wonder whether both he and the world around him were bewitched. With some difficulty he found his own house. The roof had fallen in and the door was off its hinges. He entered and called for his wife and children, but all was silent. He spotted a dog that looked like his own and called out to him, but the dog snarled and showed his teeth. My own dog has forgotten me, sighed poor Rip. He hurried to the village inn. Before it now hung a flag with stars and stripes. He spotted the face of King George on the sign, but now his red coat was blue. His head wore a cocked hat, and underneath the figure was printed General Washington. There was a crowd of people around the door, but none that Rip knew. He inquired, "Where's Nicholas Vedder?" There was a silence. Then an old man replied, "Nicholas Vedder? Why, he is dead and gone these 18 years. Where's Van Bummel, the schoolmaster?" asked Rip. He went off to the wars and is now in Congress, the old man answered. Rip's heart sank at hearing of these sad changes. I'm not myself, he said sadly. I was myself last night, but I fell asleep. Now everything has changed, and I can't tell who I am. And there he is with the men. This is Rip. The bystanders looked at each other in puzzlement. Then a young woman pressed through the throng. She had a child in her arms, which, frightened by the gray-bearded man's looks, began to cry. Hush, Rip, she murmured. The old man won't hurt you. The name of the child and the air of the mother awakened long-ago memories in Rip's mind. He caught the mother in his arms and said, I am your father, young Rip Van Winkle once, old Rip Van Winkle now. Does nobody know poor Rip Van Winkle? All stood in amaze for a while. Then an old woman exclaimed, Sure enough, it is Rip Van Winkle. Welcome home again, old neighbor. Why, where have you been these 20 years? Rip's story was soon told, for the whole 20 years had been to him but one night. Many were skeptical, but an old man who was well versed in the local traditions confirmed his story in the most satisfactory manner. He assured the company that the Catskill Mountains had always been haunted by strange beings, and that his own father had once seen these odd little men playing ninepins in the hollow of the mountain. Rip's daughter took him home to live with her. Her mother had died some years before. Having arrived at that happy age when a man can retire and rest, Rip took his place once more on the bench at the inn and was revered as one of the old, wise men of the village. He used to tell his story to every stranger that arrived. Some doubted the truth of it, but the old villagers gave Rip full credit. Even to this day, whenever a thunderstorm blows in, they say that the odd little men are at their game of ninepins, and it is a common wish of all henpecked husbands in that neighborhood, when life hangs heavy on their hands, that they might take themselves up into the Catskill Mountains in search of an adventure. All right. Make sure to go back in the text to find your answers. They do go in order. So if you go back to the beginning, you should be able to find each answer in order. So number 1, which word describes Rip Van Winkle? Go back to the beginning when they describe his character. Number 2, what does Rip's wife think of him? So find the passage where his wife is talking to him, and what does she think of her husband? Number 3, why does Rip Van Winkle leave home? Number 4, what kind of mood is created when Rip encounters the strangers? So when he's in the mountains and he comes across those people he doesn't know, how is he feeling? Number 5, the word bewitched means under a spell. Why does Rip wonder whether he and the world around him are under a spell? So what happens that makes him think that he had a spell cast on him? Number 6 is true or false. A lot of time has passed since Rip wakes up. Number 7, Rip's friends are still in the village when he wakes up. True or false? Number 8, why do the villagers end up believing that Rip was asleep for 20 years? So something happens where the villagers are like, oh, he must be right. So what happens that makes them believe Rip? Number 9, after 20 years away, how is Rip Van Winkle treated by people in his village? So how do they treat him? And number 10, when does this story take place? The last question, you're going to write a 3-sentence summary. So remember, a summary is the main events that happened. So you're giving me an overview of what happened in this story. So think of 3 really important events that happened in this story and then write them out into 3 sentences. All right, that's it for your reading. You will have a separate video for skills today, so make sure to head on over there when you're done. Have a good rest of your day, guys. See you next time.